Data for life for the Python language.
Stiamo cominciando.
I did not sort them, I just gave my vote like everybody else, and he'll answer them. And if you don't understand my trademark German accented English, we have the sentences written on Google Moderator. First question, when designing the language, how much of the grammar syntax is influenced by implementation details? For instance, did you ever remove a feature from the language because its implementation in CPython would be too difficult or not performant enough?
Very good question. Excuse me. CPython actually has never been a problem. We do, however, take implementation into account when it comes to designing language features. For example, the syntax for yield and sort of the whole way generators work, generator functions using yield statements or expressions, was very much constrained when we first designed it, and I believe that we're still sort of correct in having that constraint by being able to implement it efficiently in Jython. Because in Jython, essentially every part of the function, every entry point has to be implemented as a separate method on some hidden object. And I don't actually know much about the Jython implementation, so maybe what I said is not technically completely correct, but we definitely had to work with the constraint of how to implement generators efficiently in Jython. And we sort of, that is one of the reasons that yield is a keyword and not just some kind of function that you invoke.
Yeah. Question answered? So little applause, please. Yeah. Yeah, I have to figure out the interface, how to switch to the next question, and you deserve the applause. Python has an assert statement that is largely unused. The most common excuse is that the -o switch turning off asserts can change code behavior in unpredictable ways. What are your thoughts on assert usage in Python?
That to me sounds like a bunch of nonsense. First of all, assert being largely unused is absolutely untrue in my own code, as well as in code of many people whose code I review regularly. So I don't know where this comes from. Second of all, if -o changes your code behavior in unpredictable ways, you are definitely doing the wrong thing with assert. Now I know that realistically too many people have been doing the wrong thing with assert and not caring about -o enough. That probably if you've never tested your code with -o, it probably won't work correctly when you start using -o. So unfortunately that's how things are. But even if -o did not exist, I would still not want to replace, I would still say assert is a very valuable part of the language. And I would still claim that it ought to be a statement or at least some kind of special syntax rather than just a function. The reason being that, never mind that you can turn it off, but one of the clever things of assert is that the expression that computes the error message that gets printed is not evaluated if the expression that is tested is true. So if you would say assert true and then some gobbledygook as the second expression, the gobbledygook is never evaluated because your condition is already true. So assert really expands to if not condition, then raise a certain exception. There's no, if you were to replace that with a function, both arguments are always mandatorily evaluated before you call the function. So even if you could easily write def my assert condition comma error message, if not condition raise assertion error with error message as an argument, but it wouldn't work the same way because it would evaluate the potentially costly expression to compute the nice error message every time you call that function and not just every time it actually gets to fail. Now, that being said, there's a very unfortunate, sad thing in the syntax of assert, which is that it's too easy if especially the error message or the two expressions together don't fit on a line. If you have some kind of moral objection against using backslashes for line continuations, that you would sort of be tempted to put the combined two expressions in parentheses, because once you're inside parentheses, you can have as long a line as you want to. And of course, then the assert syntax actually says, assert a tuple of length 2. A tuple of length 2 is always true. So the assert then suddenly becomes invalid and ineffectual. So we finally sort of recognized that that was a problem, and we sort of fix it by giving you a syntax warning when you actually use that syntax. But I think in retrospect, we probably should have introduced better syntax for that with the introduction of Python 3. So that's one of my Python 3 regrets about assert. And then finally...
Will we come later to that?
Okay, well, I wasn't done with assert because I know that there are lots of people who really want to write unit tests using the assert statement. I think that is philosophically misguided because of the -O, because it means that you can't test your code at all. There's no way to test if your code actually works with -O because all your tests would actually be compiled out. So you'd have to have some kind of way of enabling and disabling -O on a per module basis. So it's your sort of your mainline code is optimized, but your unit tests are not, or something like that. And that's all kind of iffy. So maybe 5 years from now we figured out how to do that, how to declare sort of the optimization level or the different types of optimizations that could potentially be implemented on a per module basis rather than this simple command line flag. But now it gets much more a debate about -O than about assert, which I claim is still a very useful statement.
We have a very dynamic question, so I just memorized the next question and it's changed. Now we have, is Python at a disadvantage to languages like Erlang, Go, Scala, and Clojure that were designed with concurrency in mind, or are they solving different problems?
I'm not sure how you can call Python at a disadvantage while it's so vastly more popular. So maybe it is designed to solve a different problem. And that's fine with me too.
Now, for a question that's named after a famous comedian, it's hard to ask, but do you see a future for Python as a serious language for mobile platforms?
I think that some people will figure out a future for Python on mobile platforms. I don't expect I'll be playing a big role in that myself.
Do you regret including a certain feature in Python 3?
That's a so-called open-ended question, and I don't like to answer those because it's like I always get these questions when the audience doesn't actually know very much about Python. Like, what is your favorite Python feature? It's unanswerable, so please don't ask me that. Sorry. I'm sorry for being so hostile towards the audience, but it's just too hard to answer. What is my favorite or my least favorite Python feature or things like that?
I guess the official word for it is tough laugh. Not to be hostile. Okay.
Haven't heard that one in a while.
Tough laugh? I only get part of the news from the United States, and they always tell that your president is giving his fellow Americans tough laugh about education and stuff. It must be a word.
Oh, I believe it's a word. I just didn't think it was all that popular these days. But maybe it is in Europe.
Yeah, from what trips from US. And the love in Germany is in general tougher than anywhere else. An ugly consequence of decorating a function is that in most cases, its signature will have to be bracket on, star args, comma, double star, keyword args, bracket closed. PEP 362 adds an immutable signature object. How do you feel about allowing creating function programmatically without having to use eval?
Wow. Those are three almost entirely unrelated subjects. The first one, there is a handy but apparently not sufficiently publicized function somewhere. I don't use it myself, or I sort of write my own version. I think it's in FuncTools. Funk.
It doesn't solve that problem. It only copies the other metadata, like under name and so on,
Oh, okay. So but once PEP 362 is implemented, it can, right?
it can copy the signature object. Yes. So
Yeah.
So the signature object, in fact, so long as the signature object on a function can be set and it's not immutable, it could solve that.
Whoa. That's setting the signature object on the function and the signature object itself being immutable are two completely different things. The function object is not immutable. That doesn't say anything about the code object, which is immutable, or the signature object, which also, in my opinion, ought to be immutable. And the last time I sort of accepted the PEP, I thought that was the one thing we... Yeah. So, and the last sentence, how do you feel about allowing creating functions programmatically without having to use eval? I don't even see how that is connected.
The problem is if you want to create a function that takes that has a specific signature, the only way of generating that signature is with eval.
Why can't you just def the function with the right signature? What Oh, if you dynamically want to construct.
Like if you want to create a proxy function, like decorators, you can't dynamically construct the inner function to have the same signature as the function is wrapping. You can't, unless you do an eval. And there's a lovely module called the decorator module by Michel Simeonato.
But my understanding is that PEP 362 doesn't have this problem.
Right, and I think PEP 362 does solve this problem.
Which still makes me wonder what the asker of the question and all the people who voted for it were thinking. But thank you for clarifying all that, because I think it's a solved problem now.
Cool. I love solved problems.
Yeah, me too.
But partially I felt like my first EuroPython, I just used Python for 3 months, and then I was told, oh, Dr. Martelli is a great speaker and very genius, and I went to his talk about meta classes. What is your second most favorite programming language after Python?
That one I've been asked before. It's C, because CPython is implemented in C.
So good that first language is not PyPy, so you would get an indefinite loop. Where and how do you see Python in 5, 10, or 20 years? It's an indefinite loop?
Well, that's definitely another one of those essay questions that I don't particularly like. I think in 5, 10, and 20 years, Python will be alive and happy and sort of, maybe he will have grandchildren by 20 years from now, and maybe not quite. But I think in general, Python is going to be continue to be very successful, and many of the issues that people are sort of banging their head against the wall at the moment, whether it is what do we do about concurrency or the GIL or static analysis or whatever, somehow some version of either acceptance or a solution will sort of make it into the language. I don't think that there's ever going to be a time, and maybe I'm not sort of, maybe I'm not enthusiastic enough for my own child. I don't think there's ever going to be a time that Python is going to be president of the United States. But that's mostly because Python wasn't born in the United States.
I guess so, yeah.
So
that was my theory. But I heard that.
Otherwise, I'm pretty optimistic about Python's future.
But I think Arnold is trying to change that law with being born in the United States to become president.
Oh, yeah. Tough luck with that one.
Yeah, and we had our own challenges with Austrians becoming leaders in countries. Is there any feature you regret not having included in Python 3 so far?
Yeah, so I already answered that one.
Okay. The Python language is
actually,
now...
Coming back to it, I actually answered it twice. Because, first of all, I said that when I talked about assert, I said we should have changed that. So that is a positive answer. And then later I said I don't want to answer questions of that kind. So that's a negative answer. So I really did answer that question twice already.
3 times.
No,
you're very motivational.
3 times.
Yeah, talk this morning. You said we included the Unicode literal with U as a no-op in 3.3 because it should have, or it would have maybe been in 3.0. So we have 2.5 answers.
I don't think we had any chance of knowing that though when we were doing 3.0.
Definitely.
So that's a different situation.
So about things not knowing when we did something. The Python language is now over 20 years old. If you knew then what you know now, what new ideas or features would you incorporate into the language from the ground up? And why hasn't syntax readability advanced much in that time?
Okay, next question, please.
There is no more in this. It's only 2 questions this time in one.
Yeah, but sort of, I don't understand the second half, and I don't like answering the first half. And there is a very specific reason why I think that is actually a silly question. If you knew then what you know now, what would you have done differently? That's fundamentally, I believe, is the wrong kind of question. Because my belief in sort of development of projects is that when you start out, you cannot possibly know what you're eventually end up building that is successful. So sort of, if I knew then what I know now, I would have wanted to build what I've built now. But 20 years ago, well, it was more like 23 years ago, it would have been impossible to build what we build now. We had to sort of, and I really, really believe that we had to go through, we had to take what sort of looking back looks like strange detours. I don't consider them detours at all. I consider them, we couldn't have gotten here except that way that now looking back looks circuitous, but it was actually the only way to get here. You have to build something small, and you have to sort of balance how much time does it take to build it, and how can I get people to be excited and enthusiastic about it and sort of adopt it and spread the word and help me build it. And there's no way that you can sort of build everything that you know you will eventually end up with right from the start, because you would never get to the point of releasing it and then making it successful.
So you're telling, in other words, it's like the time machine paradox even exists if you only hypothetically do time travel.
That's one way of saying it. I would say it's also another example of what Alex Martelli was talking about this morning, that sort of release early and often is a very important strategy to know.
Cool. And I guess we should trust Guido on time machine issues because he's the only one who could use it for some time. What happened with the time machine? This morning you told me you lost it.
I think someone from the future borrowed it and somehow got themselves in trouble. So
Okay.
I'm going to have to wait until I catch up with them to get the keys back.
So that's C Python in 5, 10 or 20 years we catch up with the time machine. Okay, tell us about the politics of Python in the browser and Python on Android.
Oh, not on the record. Not for your life. Over beer tonight. Invite me to one of those mysterious cocktails for which I didn't see any invites in my ticket.
Have you checked your badge?
Yes.
I've seen they hid them in the badges. So make sure there is no in it. Maybe there is also a creator of the Python language cocktail, but it would be a very one-person cocktail.
Me and my cell phone and my browser.
Yeah, you. And it would be politics in the browser. And in that little kashem where Guido is telling you about those politics, please make sure there are no spies and no cameras. So, considering the popularity of dynamic languages, do you foresee future CPU hardware changes to optimize them?
Whoa.
Come on, that's an easy one.
Okay, no.
Armin already presented the hardware transactional memory.
Well, but he also said it wouldn't be viable for the next 15 years.
Okay. Yeah. So also for dynamic. Okay.
Well, I'm happy enough to point out that the JVM did grow a new opcode specifically to support dynamic languages. So I guess in theory there is a backdoor open, but that was still just a virtual machine and not
so at
actual
least the
hardware.
virtual hardware is adjusting to dynamic languages.
Yeah.
Cool. In addition to the rules from this Pi, the rules, could you identify a few great skills, practices, or types of character of best Python coders you have worked with? Beautiful is better than ugly.
I sort of know what this.py is, although I usually refer it to as the Zen of Python.
Yeah.
Practices or types of character. Blah, 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 blah. I can't read the rest.
Ah.
Of best Python coders you have worked with.
So
well, I would say one characteristic is that they get along with me, but they aren't necessarily sort of just fawning yes-sayers. They have their own opinions. I value that more than someone who approves of everything I say and do. I'm sure you were the question asker was hoping to get something that they could put on their resume or something, or that maybe even something that they could actually try to learn and improve in themselves. But I don't really know. Programming for me is one of those mysterious skills that just sort of either it comes naturally or it doesn't. And if I talk to you, I can probably tell in 5 minutes whether you have it or you don't, but I still can't tell exactly what it is that you have or don't have. And so I'm not sure. If you want to be a coder and you can't, then you probably weren't born to be a coder. And if you don't want to be a coder, but you find yourself enjoying yourself when you have to code somehow, then maybe change your mind about that.
It's like dancing.
I wouldn't know. I can't dance.
Yeah, but if you find yourself enjoying yourself when dancing, maybe, or consider. But next question. If Python 2 isn't going anywhere soon, what more can the core language do to enable cross-compatible code that works both and on both 2 and 3? For example, the U literals.
I don't know. I don't think that the core language has to change much at all at this point. I think there are plenty of tools and support libraries available that that will help you work with sort of the various strategies for supporting both versions or porting in general. I don't think that at this point we're looking for the core language to sort of magically make all your problems go away. So, sorry, I think the Unicode literals in 3.3 is probably the last thing we'll ever see in that vein.
Sorry, Magic Pill would be nice, but okay. What is the best way on latest App Engine SDK to profile, monitor memory usage, catch memory leaks, either on local or Google servers?
That is an excellent question to which I do not have a very good answer. I believe that there are some memory profilers that can be used well with Python. I've never tried to use any one of those myself, so I'm blanking out on their names. They will only run in the SDK, so I think running in the SDK with one of the existing memory profilers is your best bet.
Running in the SDK with one of the existing memory profilers. Okay. When you see the neatness of callback functions in JavaScript, Ajax and async code, do you expect a multi-line lambda proposal will ever meet your high standards for the language? Or is it simply an accepted and permanent drawback of indentation?
What exactly does the caller mean with the neatness of callback functions in JavaScript? I mean, obviously they're being facetious, right?
I would never dare to interpret into the questions.
Okay, well, since the...
But you're BDFL, you may interpret.
Well, if they're not being facetious, then they're being misguided.
So we go
maybe,
with...
Maybe I was being facetious. I cannot for the life of me see the elegance in callbacks. And in fact, the first question I asked Armin after he was done presenting his bit about software transactional memory, unfortunately I didn't get to ask it in public, but the first question I asked was, but your example of transaction.add some function and some arguments so that it will be called later is callback based, and I can't write that code like that. I can never get callback based code correctly, and the problem is not the concurrency. The problem is just that there's too much logic that sort of is too hard to express in a callback. And I know that JavaScript programmers believe that it's really neat and elegant, but I just have to disagree.
Oh, that's nice for me, because I always get grumble in my stomach when I program callbacks, and I thought, oh, I'm unworthy, but...
No, yeah, that's a good feeling to get, because
okay.
that's like when your food smells. There's a reason that it smells.
but
you're supposed to be walking away from your food when it smells.
Yeah, and I was in Sweden and they showed me some food and they told me it's delicious. So, and even my French friends with some cheese. Why is it called none?
Yeah, that's a really neat question. That was one of those random decisions I made very, very early on in the design of the language, and all the other languages I knew called it either nil or no, and somehow I thought that those were either not quite appropriate or felt unnatural. And so I decided to come up with something new. That's really the whole story. I didn't like either null or nil. So nil being sort of this strange Latin incantation, and null being, well, yeah, it felt like too technical a term somehow, and maybe I was borrowing a page from the ABC Designer's Handbook at the time, which mostly I sort of tried not to, but the ABC, Python's predecessor, language designed in actually the late 70s and early 80s, with a very explicit educational goal, had a philosophy of reinventing many technical terms that were known to all programmers, because they felt that it would be too difficult to explain to newbies what those technical terms meant, and they sort of try to find more sort of equivalent words and phrases from non-technical language, and by and large they didn't succeed very well. And so maybe I should have remembered that and not try to invent something with none that I did.
I guess we can call it part of the branding of Python, together with Assent.
Oh man.
Yeah, cool.
You should answer more of these questions for me.
I'm trying on channeling Guido. Do you think the Python language needs more innovation and support for the multi-core future, where we will have CPUs with hundreds and thousands of cores?
Well, I expect by the time you have thousands of cores that the shared memory model is not going to work all that well anyway. So it's a very interesting question. I try to sort of allude to that during my keynote this morning as well, although I was sort of a little pressed for time at that point during the talk. I think that more innovation is definitely useful. It's going to be a long time before the innovation has sort of reached an acceptable model that would be worth including in the language. I mean, I'm very glad that Armin is doing software transactional memory, and I'm also very glad that he's not pushing for PEPs or other forms of inclusion in the language just yet, because it's sort of, we need more innovation, and innovation is actually incompatible with including things in the language. You mean you include things in the language after you're done innovating and you've got sort of best practice that actually works, and then we can think about sort of incorporating something in a language.
Like being frozen for 1,000 years. The standard library.
Yeah, yeah, like the standard library is death.
It doesn't smell funny. Wouldn't it be lovely to be able to load PyPy as CPython module and to offload intensive computation to it? This way, C extension modules will be available as well as fast shit optimization. Didn't Armin and Antonio present something in Vilnius?
That sounds more like a question for the PyPy team. Yeah, I suppose it would be lovely if you could do that, but I think that making it happen falls squarely in the domain of the PyPy team. Has to somehow work on making that happen, if they're at all interested. Okay, well,
so I remember correctly that you presented it.
It's a bad idea because with different memory models and everything. So, bad idea.
Okay, it's on very high authority. It's a bad idea. So no, it would not be lovely.
Okay. What is the status of the WSGI standard in Python 3, on which disagreement seems having hampered Py 3 acceptance in the whole web development sector?
Well, I think that's a little exaggerated. I remember 1 or 2 years ago there being lots of discussion about sort of redesigning WSGI with lots of new features for Python 3, and not enough people were actually interested in moving that forward. And so what happened instead was that a very, very, very tiny change to the WSGI standard was made that made it possible to use essentially unchanged or only changed for Python syntax practices with Python 2 and Python 3. And that's where the WSGI standard is. I believe that's called WSGI 101 or something. I have a feeling that all those other innovations were sort of attempts to reinvent too many wheels at the same time. And maybe they can be sort of reconsidered as extensions or a different kind of standard. But I don't think that the core WSGI standard is in any way a sort of a hindrance to acceptance of Py3K, and I expect that what really was the matter was that if anything hindered Py3K acceptance in the web world, it was probably there not being any realistic ports to Python 3000 of everybody's popular web framework, from WebUp to Django to anything else.
And there's more than one web framework?
Oh, there are as many web frameworks as there are companies doing web development, actually.
Cool. Do you see CPython evolving to run other languages than Python in a similar fashion to the JVM running Python, Ruby, and Scala? So I guess it's about the CPython virtual machine.
Yeah, there is no such thing. So no, that's not at all what we care about. That's sort of, even though Python has something called bytecode and Java has something called bytecode, and sort of we developed those terms independently, or we probably borrowed them both from the same ancestor. I think there was something called bytecode in some Smalltalk implementation. We use bytecode in a very different way. In Python, bytecode is purely an internal implementation detail of the CPython implementation. So everybody who writes Python code that depends on some form of bytecode hacks better know for sure that they're not only tying their code to CPython, but they're also tying their code to a specific version of Python, because the bytecode format can change at any time, effectively between any two releases. Not counting bugs, but between any two feature releases, we can and do often change the bytecode format by adding new operators or removing operators, or sometimes just sort of changing the meaning of operators, or generating different code and so on.
So if somebody is thinking to run something with Python bytecode, the answer is do not do it.
Please don't.
Okay. Given that a lot of work has been done with virtualenv and other ways to deal with dependency hell in Python, is Google App Engine not a huge step backwards for Python development?
Well, I would have to ask Google PR people what I can say on that question. Not much. It's sort of, there are a lot of negativity in that question, so I think I probably shouldn't say
I guess
anything.
a politically correct version would be, no matter what, Google App Engine is a great tool to use Python in the cloud environment.
Oh, yeah,
it doesn't say anything, but...
Well, that's, I don't want to say something like that either.
Yeah, that's why the expendable guy does it. Mobile apps are facing CPU problems that will be solved within years. However, interpreted languages and high CPU usage are heavier on batteries, which hardly ever evolve. Do we expect language CPU costs to be a long-term problem in the mobile world?
I've never developed or even tried to develop a real app for mobile. I have no expertise in that field. I think that the mobile development world has to sort of somehow come up with its own answer to battery usage. And sort of finger pointing at classes of languages, I don't think that's particularly useful way of trying to pretend the problem doesn't exist. So to other finger pointing, could a low-level language at the C level ever be as easy to use as Python? Just to name a few things I like in Python, with duck typing, the syntax compactness, and the speed of development. Well, you should definitely look at Go and see what you think of that. It's not as low level as C, and is not as dynamic as Python, but it's lower level than Python, and it's still, according to some people who use it a lot and like it a lot, has a fairly Pythonic feel to it. They certainly borrowed a few notational ideas from Python, and they sort of worked hard in making the language compact and have a very fast development speed.
Okay. In Ruby, acceptance tests are nearly universally written in Cucumber. In Python, there are many frameworks, but no real standard. Could we see something like behave or letters put in the standard library?
Stack Overflow. I can't understand the question. I don't know what cucumbers and lettuce and behave are, and behave looks like a verb to me anyway. So,
and lettuce and cucumber are vegetables.
Cucumber and lettuce, they're a way of testing with custom DSL instead of using either Ruby or Python. So you end up writing your tests in a language which you invented yourself, which has no documentation. The theory is if you try and make your...
So the theory is based on the fact that if you try and make your acceptance test language as close to English or whichever language is your preferred spoken language as possible, then you can get your customers and your end users to write the acceptance tests. But of course, nobody on the planet has ever actually got their customers to write acceptance tests. So you end up...
What on earth is an acceptance test anyway?
A functional test, an integration test, and an end-to-end test. And they call them acceptance tests because if you can specify your requirements as a set of tests, you can say we can know we've met the customer's requirements on which they base their acceptance of the project if we pass this set of tests. So they are tests which, if they pass, the customer, in theory, will accept the whole project.
Since you mentioned customer several times, that sounds like one of those classic mistakes trying to solve a people problem with software tools.
It's kind of related to the whole sort of agile movement. So yes, I guess. Yeah, I mean, they really are an abomination, these things. So we should keep them out of the Python standard library.
Okay, well, that answers that. I'm so glad there's someone here who can speak with authority about testing.
Cool. How effective was the language moratorium? Should it have been longer or shorter?
I think it was perfect.
So not change it. Cool. Yeah.
No, it did.
If it's perfect, good.
Yeah.
How much is perfect in the software world besides Python?
Well, I mean, the language moratorium was sort of a very discrete property because you can keep it sort of for one release or for two releases or for 0 releases or maybe more than 2, but it's all small integers, and I think the value 1 was just perfectly chosen.
Okay, Py3K, 90% or more of modules would work without much changes if we had from past import print statement. I have no statistics to prove it, and I'm just reading the question. I'm asking just for a rough, incomplete version for easier migration and more significant diffs. Would you take a patch? Chris?
I would not take a patch. I mean, I already answered that implicitly previously when I said that the U prefix was the last thing we accepted for that kind of backward compatibility. I also think the observation is wrong, because print statements are a very shallow feature, and it's actually, the print statement is one of the very few features that can be perfectly translated mechanically. By looking at the syntactic occurrence of print in your Python 2 program, you can perfectly translate it into a corresponding print function invocation in Python 3. It's one of the few cases where you don't actually have to think about the translation and you can leave it to a tool. And of course, in Python 2.6 and 2.7, you can say from future import print function. So there's no reason to sort of want backwards compatibility in the other direction while you already have forwards compatibility from the Python 2 perspective. Also, I think programs that are full of print statements, especially when it comes to library modules, are a bad design. I mean, if you're not printing to some specific file object that you received as a parameter, you're just printing to standard output, which in a library is usually a bad idea. You should be maybe using the logging module or writing strings to a stream that the caller provides. And by the time you're writing to a stream, the print statement is not all that advantageous. So if you have a lot of print statements in there, you're probably writing sort of newbie-style code. And you shouldn't have to worry so much. You should just throw it all away and start over in Python 3 because you've already learned so much about Python. You'd be embarrassed to try to port your old code that you wrote full of print statements anyway.
Okay. And the time machine is in the future, so we can't import from the past, if I understand correctly.
I don't know that. The time machine paradox doesn't even bother me so much.
Yeah. You had it your time. Wirt wrote several languages. So far you have only made one. What will your next language be like?
Well, Wirt is actually a good example because none of his languages were as successful as his first one. So I think I'll call. I'll sort of claim victory while I'm ahead of the game.
Yeah, wise decision. Despite Python being excellent as it is, sometimes the issue of no efficient switch statement and multi-level break bites me. Any particular reasons for these not being a language already? Would it be okay for me to cook up a patch?
Oh, again, that over-eager patch offer. Well, the switch statement has been proposed very seriously and has been rejected several times, every time it was brought up. There's even a pep about it as far as I remember. So there's two peps. Oh my gosh. So there's no chance that's a third attempt would be accepted. This was actually an explicit decision to keep the language smaller and simpler by not having those. And multi-level break is kind of the same thing. Yeah, from your perspective, when you really need it, it would be so nice to be able to write that three-level break statement. From the perspective of the person who is going to spelunk your code 6 months from now, they would be much better off if you couldn't write that triple nested loop and had been forced to refactor your code a little bit to be more readable. So I think both features are absent from the language for very good reasons.
Okay, stop writing that patch, port a module to a Py3K. Do you regret breaking backwards compatibility at a point when the ecosystem was flourishing? How will you handle a Python 2 that refuses to die despite being out of favor with dear leader?
Wow, man, we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel here, I think. Oh man, do I? No, I have no regrets. I think we did exactly the right thing. I think the ecosystem is flourishing as it was never before, so I don't think there's any indication that there was anything wrong with that from that perspective either. Python 2 refusing to die, actually, it can stay in stasis for as long as it wants to. There's no sort of necessary end of life for Python 2.7. People can keep using Python 2.7 forever. I'm serious. We're not going to withdraw it or sort of declare it out of favor. We might stop fixing bugs in it, but since apparently it's already perfect, why would there be any bugs left to fix, right?
So there will not even be an addition to the Zen like thou shall not use Python 2.
No, that would be kind of a lame way to fill the last slot in the Zen of Python.
Totally. I can't understand why there is a literal for every single set but the empty one. There is a reason for this, is there a reason for this, except curly braces off, on, curly braces close is empty dict already. You have to read this stuff. Have you thought about adding one?
Well, there are a lot of people who don't read the PEPs before they ask questions, because believe me, every possible syntactic way of writing the empty set, including writing it as empty curly braces and just forcing people to write the empty dictionary is something else. Everything has been proposed, considered, discussed, and eventually rejected as not being worth it. There's even a solution that worked in ABC, but that can't really be made to work in Python. In ABC, there was a similar problem. It had, I forget what they were called, I think lists and tables. And they both used curly braces, but they had a sort of a similar syntactic difference. Once there was one element, it was sort of either a key and value or just a bunch of values. But the empty one was ambiguous, just like it is in Python, except they somehow solved it by having a special type that represented empty one or the other, and it would sort of mutate into either a dictionary or a set once you started using it.
It was like a Schrödinger literal. Like Schrödinger's cat, you don't know if it's a literal until you check it.
Yeah, but it's sort of that only worked in ABC because that is actually technically mostly a statically typed language, even though it didn't look like one. And it also didn't really behave like one when you considered more than one function at the time, but it was meant to be a statically typed language at the sort of the single function or single module level.
Okay, we have 5 more minutes. Next question. Are you happy with the state of integrated development environments available for Python? Do you think better IDEs would be needed to help reach Python even more developers?
You should ask the people who are actively peddling IDEs. They see some customers. There is the venerable Wing IDE, which still gets represented at Python every year, so they must have happy customers. There's also PyCharm, which is up and coming, and is having some amount of effect. I think there are also still people using Komodo, which was ActiveState's offering in this space. My understanding is that IDEs currently don't work all that well for Python, and they're also not all that necessary. If you're writing Java, you cannot live without an IDE that helps you at every step of your programming experience. To get to the same level of help for Python, on the one hand, is much harder because you'd have to somehow solve the puzzle of static analysis for a dynamic language. So you'd have to make lots of educated guesses to somehow come up with, well, we have a function that takes a parameter x and it calls the foo method on x. What's the type of x? That's a really hard problem in general. There are a number of heuristics that can sort of make it much more likely that you'll be able to answer that question correct most of the time, which is probably good enough for an IDE. It wouldn't be good enough if it was a compiler that actually tried to translate your program to faster but still correct code. But for an IDE, it's okay if it occasionally messes up, as long as it only messes up for sort of esoteric cases and not for what the beginners are doing. That problem has not been solved yet, although very recently somebody sort of decided to give it another go, and he's been posting to some secret mailing list. If you follow Python dev, you'll know what I mean. It's actually very interesting ideas. It's going to be a while before that bears any real fruit.
So you could have managed to talk 2 minutes longer to avoid the next question. But so we are.
I use Emacs about 99% of the time, and VI, or actually probably Vim, 1% of the time. And because Vim is the editor that I learned first, it is still the case that after using Vim for about 1 minute, because I usually very quickly sort of decide that I don't actually need to use it, I go back to Emacs. It takes me 10 minutes to stop using Vim commands. That rarely happens in the other direction. And nevertheless, I like Emacs much more. But that is because I sort of grew up using Emacs. For the current generation, I think you're probably better off using Vim. So that's like, how many answers is that?
Whew. We have a challenging last one, but you can only say, okay, when will we have a language specification for Python?
Oh, someone who listened to my keynote this morning, because or maybe someone who didn't listen, because I mentioned that in practice it's too hard to come up with a language specification that is actually sort of complete enough to be able to implement the language, say if you were a Martian or something and you hadn't already used Python for a decade. So yeah, when is probably never, or maybe when Python is dead, like what happened to Pascal.
Okay.
Thanks.
So,
well, we made it through.
Yeah. Guido van Rossum. Again. Thank you so much for answering all the questions or denying to answer some, which is also an answer. We will continue in the same room with lightning talks, and we start in 5 minutes, is correct? So,
you can start now and have one extra lightning talk.
Yeah, but nobody registered in the backup slot. And we need some room to arrange. The people with the Transifex lightning talk and Marc-André Lemberg, please come to me. So, One, two, 1, 2.